Now, the criticism, like I said, it's expected. It was expected based on the events that were going to take place, the counterstrike from Israel, the tactics from Hamas, so on and so forth. I mean, anybody who is paying attention, anticipated that, and I'm sure Israel anticipated that as well. And I'm sure they anticipated criticism from the usual jokers in the world. One of them being Barack Obama, who, as I've mentioned most recently, at the beginning of this video, openly criticized Israel back decades ago. And here he is again, putting his worthless 2 cents and criticizing Israel once again. We know that he doesn't like Israel. And I think we know why he doesn't like Israel. And it goes back to a rumor of him having Islamic origins, right? Specifically, I think from his father's side, which he supposedly denies. But when you see videos of him talking about Islam and stuff like that, he says it with such passion. He's lying. He's lying to us, and so on and so forth. But again, the United Nations also has openly criticized. We know that they're anti-Israel, and it's not that you can. Listen, I want to be clear, because I don't want to get to the left where you can't criticize something and you're labeled as something. That's not what's happening here, because what we're actually seeing, their dislike towards Israel, or their criticism towards Israel, is rooted in anti-Semitic views. These people don't believe that Israel should have its own country. They don't like the Jewish people. They don't like the Jewish nation. They want to see it eradicated. Right? So, I mean, that's different than, I don't like this group of people. Like, for instance, I don't support BLM. I criticize a lot of these superhero woke films, right? And so on and so forth, especially the ones that, tend to bash men and stuff like that. And I get labeled misogynistic. That's not what we're talking about. I don't hate women, and I don't want to see women eradicated, right? It's not the same thing. You can't compare that, right? It's like apples and avocados, right? But in addition to the UN criticizing them, obviously, we've got members of Congress that are of a Muslim faith, and they hold nothing back, and they are constantly criticizing Israel, and they made no hesitation to do that in this particular instance. We've seen Rashida Tlaib put a Palestinian flag outside of her office, which is massively disrespectful. I don't think anybody's flag should be outside of anybody's public office, other than either the United States flag should be there, and in addition, the state that you represent, right? Those two are perfectly fine. Everything else and anything else should not be there in any direction, right? People of a Israel background shouldn't have that either, right? If it's good for one direction, it's good for the other. But these are folks that they pretend. They're pretenders, right? Because we've heard from Ilhan Omar in prior years anti-Semitic comments that she's made on the congressional floor, where she has been repeatedly reprimanded. So, the left has a real problem here. The Democrats have a real problem where they're very, very split on this situation. And it's a shame that Republicans aren't united, because this is one that we can very, very, have a good potential to sway people to say, look, that's what your party is supporting. You might want to think about coming over here, or at least moving yourself more towards the middle. But unfortunately, Republicans are equally divided. Specifically, I would say the constituents, right? Republican constituents, right? Like I said, we want to stay out of foreign wars, but we don't realize the ties that we have to Israel, and that part gets factored out. So I think there's a split in both parties, but it's for two different reasons, right? Well, in addition to the criticism, what else comes afterwards but their threats, right? As Iran is the #1 country that supports and funds terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, it's only natural that they would eventually get into the fight, either directly or indirectly, right? They're indirectly funding it. That's one way. But then they can also get in directly. And they've made their threats, right? Iran has warned the U.S. To not get further involved, right? So that's been made clear. And they've done it openly at the UN, if I'm not mistaken. Surprisingly, but not surprising, and I say this for two different reasons, NATO ally Turkey it was condemned Hamas originally, but now seems to stand with Hamas and has labeled Hamas as freedom fighters. Think about that. What these monsters did to civilians. It's not that they went in and attacked a military outpost. They went in, killed civilians, raped them, brutalized them, tortured them, burned them, beheaded them, but they're freedom fighters. This again, according to the president of Turkey. Now he's saying this because obviously the attacks and from Israel, the counterattacks and the propaganda that's going on, right? And obviously there's a connection. There's an Islamic connection with all of these Muslim countries, right? They stand so united, against Israel. It's amazing the level of animosity and hatred that they have for this one little piece of a country that's the size of New Jersey for us, right? But anyhow, the Turkey president has gone and declared Israel to have committed acts of war. Now, I don't recall, or I didn't read, or I didn't come across him calling Hamas or accusing them of committing acts of war. No, but Turkey has no problem in calling Israel and saying Israel has committed acts of war. It's absolutely astonishing. It's unbelievable. But again, if you understand the background of the region, the area, the people, it's not really surprising. Now, what's interesting are the deceptive tactics that are being used, right? Acts of war isn't the only tactical phrase that these Hamas supporters use in order to try and throw blame on Israel and divert from Hamas's massacre, from the massacre that they committed. You've got people that are going to be calling Israelis colonizers, right? And we've heard BLM use that word here to white Americans, right? And it's so absurd. Yeah, right. The Europeans colonized countries because they went out. But if you look at native Indians, they also colonized different tribes. They conquered them, right? They conquered other Indian tribes, right? Same thing with the Asians, right? Same thing with the Europeans. They conquered each other. I mean, it's just so stupid. These people need a history lesson. Anyhow, redirection from Israeli victims to Palestinian victims. And we can see a glimpse of that with Ilhan Omar in this next video. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind that I'm just showing you a glimpse, but these are similar talking points that I have heard similarly, not just from this individual, but from multiple individuals, whether they be just regular protesters, journalists, news anchors, etc. Right? So again, they apparently there's a memo that goes out and they all repeat the same talking points. But let's check this one out.
I have a question. Your colleague Richie Torres has said calling for a ceasefire is a dangerous double standard that the U.S. wouldn't hold themselves to. So my question is if this attack happened in America, would you be calling for a ceasefire as well?
Vengeance is not a foreign policy doctrine. We are here to save lives. Israelis, Palestinians, Americans. Anyone else?
So is that a yes or a no?
Anyone else?
I do have another question. Why don't you want Israelis to go
from
after the
anyone
terrorists
else?
that burned, tortured, killed their babies and children and still have them hostage? Why don't you want the Israelis to go after the terrorists that did that?
How many more killings is enough for you? Is it 1,000 more? 2,000 more? 3,000? How many more Palestinians would make you happy if they died? Will you be fine if all of the people of Gaza were gone? Would that make you happy? Would that be the thing that makes you proud? And maybe that's the question you should ask Richie. Is he okay? How many more Palestinian lives is he comfortable with? Because I'm not comfortable with any more.
How many more lives, Palestinian lives? You know what's interesting is the facade going on here. Number one, it's the sign, if you see there, ceasefire at the podium, right? That's a facade. Because what happens is if there's a ceasefire, like there have been multiple times in the past, those people continue to attack. The Israelis stop shooting and Hamas continues to attack. So that is baloney all on its own. But then the outrage is, for Palestinian deaths. Notice how she, at the beginning, mentioned both Israeli victims or civilians and then Palestinian ones as well. Right, that's the facade, right? That's where they just want to, kind of mention Israel because they don't want to seem part of it. They don't want to openly seem it, right? But you could see the outrage from Ilhan is only towards Palestine or the Palestinian people, right? And this isn't just the only example, right? I mean, if you look throughout her entire political career, right? It's been criticism towards Israel, criticism towards Jews, defense of Islam, defense of Muslims. So she is not unbiased here whatsoever. And so the reporter's asking a legitimate question. It's like, wait a minute. So Hamas gets to kill over 1,000 civilians, and Israel's just got to take it and sit there? But notice the tactic, the redirect and the reshifting of focus back to the Palestinian civilians. And again, we don't know how many there are. I'm sorry, I can't take what Hamas is reporting at face value. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm sure that there's some, and I'm sure that there's probably many, a good amount. But again, if Hamas hadn't done it, don't start none, won't be none. I think that applies here, right? But now what's interesting is I've got this video here from Ben Shapiro, and I want to show this aspect of it because we're talking about a two-state solution in some cases, right? That's another talking point, and we heard the Young Turk actually say this in the video, where if he were president, he would vie for a two-state solution. Naturally, of course he would. And then here's the interesting part, though. According to Ben and the interview that he gave with Piers Morgan, that's been on the table already, and it was declined. So let's go ahead and watch this one.
Who's a member of the center-right Likud party in Israel. This is not, when it comes to foreign policy, the reality is that since the rejection of any peace deal by Mahmoud Abbas in 2009, when Ehud Olmert was the prime minister of Israel, there's been very little disagreement between any of the parties with regard to foreign policy because they do not have a peace partner. The Oslo process was killed by the Palestinians, and it was killed by the Palestinians when they rejected multiple peace offerings by Ehud Barak, by Ariel Sharon, by Ehud Olmert, over and over and over again, by Yitzhak Rabin, by Shimon Peres. Benjamin Netanyahu himself, in the Wye River Accords of 1998, handed over significant portions of the West Bank to the Palestinians. So you can say that Netanyahu's a problem. That's fine. But the reality
I was
is
really asking you whether I was asking you whether you feel he is a problem, that actually all the division that's been caused by his attempt to usurp the power of the Supreme Court, as many people see it, all that division in Israel has actually diminished his authority. And that it's come at a time when you really need somebody with real authority.
Well, I mean, I don't think that right now that's really the question, considering, again, it's a unity government, and I'm talking to everybody in Israel, and all of those divisions heal up in a moment when your children are being slaughtered at the border, as it turns out. So, all of the judicial reform conversation is a separate conversation. We can critique how fast they went in terms of this coalition. They went too fast. They scaled it back. There were serious divisions in Israeli society about what kind of power the judiciary ought to have. There are many people on both sides, actually, who believe the judiciary had too much power. There are a lot of people on both sides who believe the government went too fast on that. Internal political divisions have become completely irrelevant here. If Netanyahu were replaced tomorrow by Benny Gantz, which is what a lot of Israelis would hope for, if that were to happen literally tomorrow, nothing would change. Nothing would change. And the reason nothing would change is because, again, this is an issue. This particular issue is about Hamas. This has
So there you have it. Multiple peace offerings have been rejected. And again, from what I understand, a two-state solution was on the table in prior years, and that's been, declined, because they don't really want a two-state solution, right? The issue here is it goes deeper, like I've mentioned. It's rooted in hatred towards the Jews. So even if there was a two-state solution, it's not going to stop Hamas from attacking Israel or attacking Jews. And we'll get into that, and I'll have proof of that. We'll get into that in a little bit. But notice here how Ben, in this particular video, Ben acknowledges that, listen, it's not Bibi Netanyahu that's the problem here, right? Because the Young Turk, check the Young Turk, he mentioned how Bibi Netanyahu is bloodthirsty. He's this evil right wing in his administration. And Ben is confirming, look, I'm talking to a lot of people in Israel. on both sides of the political spectrum, and everybody's on the same page. And everybody gets on the same page pretty easily when your people are being killed and murdered and beheaded, etc., etc. So again, the falsehood narratives, the deceptive tactics coming from these people, you've got to be aware of it, right? Because they're going to do it to you. The last one that I continue to hear, and we've heard this for quite some time now, from many years, going back to Hillary Clinton, is the Islamophobic label. So let's get into this video, and I've got Brigitte Gabriel.
I'm a terrorism analyst. I do not speak as an Islamophobe. And by the way, I never lived in Beirut. I left Lebanon. I'm in South Lebanon, was raised in the South, and left to Israel and immigrated to the United States from the state of Israel, not from Lebanon. So as a terrorism analyst who made it my life's mission to study and report on terrorism, and also as a survivor to Islamic terror, it is important to identify and talk about the terrorists and what they are doing. If it was a Christian screaming in Jesus' name, mowing people down with trucks all over the world, I will be talking about that Christian as well. But what we are witnessing right now is not Buddhists killing people, it's not Christians killing people, it's not Jews killing people, it's not Hindus killing people. It is Islamic terrorists yelling Allahu Akbar, mowing down people, whether in Barcelona, whether in England, whether in Australia, whether in America, whether in Canada, and I can go down the list. And also the ban that we are talking about is stopping the visa lottery program, is for all countries. We're not specifying this is only, we want to stop immigration from people coming from Algeria. Actually, the visa program in general, the visa lottery, need to be stopped regardless of what country is on the list. But we are talking about radical Islamists coming into our country, and knowing that ISIS specifically said that they want to infiltrate whether the refugee population or get into America and the West. And we have already seen them do that. And this is why we have to be very careful in throwing political correctness in the garbage and let the terrorism analysts and the generals and those in power do what they need to do to protect their countries, whether in England or in the United States or any other Western country in the world.
So there you have it. Now here's the interesting part. Brigitte Gabriel is from Lebanon, as we have mentioned before. She is from the Middle East, right? So they're going to use racism, in addition to Islamophobia, racism as an additional tactic, right? But Islam is not a race, right? Islam is not a race, so you cannot be racist. And let's be real. To call a spade is not Islamophobia, right? Are all Muslims terrorists? No, that's obviously true. That's a true statement. But all jihadist terrorists happen to be Muslim. I mean, that's just the reality, unfortunately. They're the ones, as Brigitte mentioned in that video, they're the ones screaming Allahu Akbar and doing atrocities. Now, this was filmed, that video was from 2021. I don't know specifically what took place. I think there was like some lone wolf terrorist that started running people over, maybe in New York or something like that. I don't really quite remember. But 2021, again, that's when Biden starts to take over and we start to see these random attacks going on. But she does mention something very interesting, and that is political correctness. Political correctness has damaged us as a country. I can't imagine any general of a military in ancient times, let's say, allowing people that want to openly destroy your kingdom or your nation, right? You allow them in and you give them access to just about everything and anything, right? Without properly vetting them, right? I think that's the key word here. And we know, listen, we know the FBI is not doing their job. They're so focused on looking for, right-wing extremists, Catholics, considering Catholics as extremists, the rise of white supremacy. They're also focused on parents not wanting to have their kids, brainwashed with gender politics, right? That's what the FBI seems highly focused on. It's not really, making sure that they're vetting the people that are coming over, which is really sad. But anyhow, rant over. People have been labeling, Brigitte Islamophobic, for quite some time, and it's a tactic that the left uses to, as a tool to silence, their opponents, right? So, just this past week, I heard someone who is of a Jewish background, actually it was last week, of a Jewish background, who stood firm on defending Israel and its ability to defend herself, he was labeled a baby killer because he supports Israel. You know, it's again, it's a tactic that these people are using to silence people. And then you may, if you guys have watched the video 2 videos ago, someone called me a Zionist as a derogatory way because I support Israel. That doesn't mean that I support genocide and killing everybody so that Israel can know, but I do support the fact that Israel is Israel, and Israel's not the one that's preemptively attacking people. Israel is in a defensive position. And listen, to swing at someone, to punch at someone, and expect them not to punch back is absolutely absurd. Now, some of you guys might be of a Christian background, right? And you say, well, you know, Jesus says, you know, to turn the cheek. Yeah, but you got to keep in mind, Israel does not really follow Jesus Christ, right? Judaism is the predominant religion there. And the Jewish people don't acknowledge Jesus Christ as anything other than, you know, maybe a teacher, you know, a good teacher. That's as far as they go, right? Muslims have him as a prophet, minor prophet, but they don't really listen to obviously anything that he says. So from a Christian perspective, and I really do think, you know, we may be misinterpreting or taking that verse out of context, because I can't imagine somebody breaking into my home, attempting to kill my family, and I'm just going to turn the cheek and be like, hey, would you like to pray about what you're doing first? I'm sorry, I'm going to defend my family at whatever cost. So I do think that we use that out of order. Not only that, but listen, let's be real, guys. We celebrate July 4th here in this country. It's our independence. How did we do that? Was it not through war? Right? We stood up against you know, the people that were oppressing us, and we gained our freedom. So if you think that Israel is in the wrong here and you celebrate July 4th, in my eyes, you're a little bit of a hypocrite. But, you know, whatever. That's just the way it is. So the fear of being labeled, you know, homophobic, racist, misogynistic, etc., over the last decade has unfortunately succeeded in silencing many people. But this tactic does fall a little bit short on people like Brigitte, myself, and many others. Many others are, you know, are dismissing those claims and just, you know, going forward, you know, speaking their mind, right? And so now, what's interesting is the young Turk who's running for president used this tactic as a trigger words, right? He used words such as racist and bigotry and Islamophobic, right? Islamophobia. But, you know, unlike the other labels, this one comes with a degree of danger, right? You know, if somebody calls you a racist or bigot or misogynistic or whatever, or homophobic, right? You know, you're not gonna get blown up, right? But by allowing the Islamophobic label to come on, it's opened up the book. It's opened up the gates, if you will, to allow actual terrorists to come in. Again, that doesn't mean every Muslim is a terrorist. That's not what I'm saying. But it does allow them to disguise themselves in the weeds, if you will, right? And come on over, right? So that's just the reality. So trying to, you know, silence someone over legitimate concerns of radical terroristic Islam is used every day, and it's very, very dangerous. Let's listen to a son of a former Hamas member, and if I'm not mistaken, he's the son of one of the founding members of Hamas. Let's listen to his testimony.
It seems like people are still confused. Someone that's not confused is Mossab Youssef. He's the son of a founding Hamas leader, and he's the author of Son of Hamas. Thanks so much for joining the program. You know, I'm always curious because we have so many Americans here that don't understand Hamas. Can you paint the picture for the audience of who we're dealing with? Some have referred to them as Israel's ISIS. Why do they say this, sir?
Well, good morning.
Morning.
It's the wrong comparison, you know, to say Hamas and ISIS, because I think Hamas is a lot more dangerous. Look at the division and the global confusion because of Hamas. You know, they brought us to our knees somehow, you know, by their brutality and their barbarism. You know, brutality is even underestimating Hamas act. Hamas is a religious movement, and they are raging a religious movement against Israel. This is what they are doing. The mainstream media cannot say this because they're afraid to ignite a religious war. And what I say, it already is. They want to annihilate the Jewish people because they are Jewish people, because they are Jewish state. This is why they hate Israel. They want to establish an Islamic state on the rubble of the state of Israel. Campaign, their campaign title is Tufan al-Aqsa, which means the flood of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So it is a religious situation, and we just need to expose them for what they are. They are not a national movement. If they were a national movement, a political movement, you can satisfy their ambition somehow. You can negotiate with them. But when they are a religious movement, that they don't believe even in political borders, that they are driven by dark hatred towards a race, towards a nation. And we saw that when they killed people indiscriminately. It's all evidence, of to what extent Hamas can go.
So, like we mentioned before, I mean, this is going on. There's people that are going to tell you it's this, it's that. The bottom line, the root cause of everything, like I mentioned before, is it's evil, it's hatred towards a group of people. This is the son who was actively involved in this in Hamas, right? Thankfully, he left it and saw the error of his ways. But he goes on to give an account of how he was raised to hate the Jews and blame the Jews for all of their problems, etc., etc., etc. So this is coming from the horse's mouth. That this is about religion, and their hatred towards the Jewish people and the Jewish nation. I mean, it's dangerous to everyone who doesn't believe what these monsters do, including the normalized, westernized Muslims, if you will, right? Like I mentioned before, not all Muslims are bad. Not all Muslims are terrorists. Again, I want to make that clear. But at the same token, every single Muslim should be out in the street marching, condemning Hamas, and putting international pressure on these totalitarian regimes and these terroristic groups. And I just don't see it. Now, here's a reporter who traveled to Israel to cover the events that took place. And according to her words, she went with an open mind for any form of solution. Let's take a listen.
We've been on the ground here in Israel for the past several days, and I've seen a lot. And frankly, this has been one big myth-busting trip. I came here with an open mind, and I thought, I'm open to see anything, to hear from everyone. We've heard a lot of different opinions, do not get me wrong. We've talked to Palestinians, we've talked to pollsters, we've talked to Israeli members of the Knesset, we've talked to journalists, we've talked to people from the right, left, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel, two-state solution, one-state solution. Hell, there is no solution. Let me tell you some of the things that we found out while we were here. The security wall, it's not a wall. It's a giant fence. Only about 5% of it is a wall. We found that Palestinians can actually freely come into Israel so long as they're not carrying any pipe bombs or explosive vests. They have to go through the sort of security that's akin to essentially going through an airport. You know who can't go the other way? Yeah, it's actually the Jews. It's actually Israelis. They can't go into Zone A. They can't go into the Palestinian, one part of the West Bank. That's according to essentially self-prohibition, but also because they know that if they go in there, there's a very good chance they will die. I'm a Christian. I really would have liked to see Bethlehem while I was here, where my Lord and Savior was born. Can't. There's a giant minaret there right now. And actually there are posters all over the place of suicide bombers who are essentially exalted by the populace around now Muslim-controlled Palestinian Bethlehem. I should mention, by the way, that also behind me is an Israeli military hospital where they treat just Israelis. No, they actually treat a lot of Syrians there. Syrian women who from ages 8 to 80 have been brutally raped by ISIS. I came here believing in the two-state solution. I really did. I am at a point now where I frankly do not. I believe in a one-state solution. I believe that the only way that this little sliver, a sliver of land that could fit into one of the smallest states, New Jersey, the only way that this little piece of sand, these rocks, will remain free is if Israelis are in control of it. Because I'm worried that if you allow any portion of the West Bank or otherwise to become under Palestinian PLO, essentially terrorist or let alone Hamas control, it's going to look like that.
So this is what it sounds like when reality hits and political correctness is thrown out the window, right? She's very right. You know, everything that she described. I was there 5 months ago. We went through a security checkpoint. It's fenced. They do allow you know, some tourists to go in sometimes, right? Obviously, we go in, we spend, right? We're buying things. It was very dangerous. There was a moment where actually there was a moment where we went into, there was a couple of different cities that were under you know, Muslim control, and Bethlehem was one of them. We actually did manage to go there, thankfully, so I did get to see that. As a matter of fact, one of the people that we were with had an IDF hat, and he was told by our guide to have that guy take his hat off because you know, it would be very dangerous and something could potentially happen. So the guy had to remove his hat. And then we were also in Jericho, which was also under Muslim control. And you know, I unfortunately made the mistake not realizing a lot of these people, they speak Spanish. Apparently there's a lot of Hispanic tourism in Israel, and a lot of them speak Spanish. So when they were asked, they ask you, one of their icebreakers, if you will, was to ask you where you're from. Oh, where are you from? Colombia, Nicaragua, Panama, whatever, right? And so when it came to me, I wasn't born in any of those countries, so I said America, accidentally, or not realizing where I was, right? And the danger abroad. And the guy who asked me and he responded in such a real sinister way. He was like, "Oh, praise glory to America," you know. And oh. And so I went back to the bus and I told my brother-in-law and you know, Saul, and there's a couple other, you know, big fellas, and I said, "Hey guys, we got to keep our head on a swivel. I made the mistake and said this, that," and now the way that he responded, you know, we got to just be alert, right? So she's absolutely right. Everything that she mentioned here, it might not be politically correct, but it certainly hits the target.